Hello and welcome everyone to episode 8 of Gear Over Beer. I am your host Noah McCormick, and on today's episode we have Gray Gordon Zoom calling in. He's going to chat with us about his new project called Terminal Crush and their new release called Columbus. In my personal opinion, I think it's one of the releases of the year, and this record really doesn't get the attention that it deserves. We're also going to talk about what it was like getting to go on Warped Tour and Gray's passion for vintage thrifting. You can follow Gray at GrayXGordon on social media, and make sure you listen to Terminal Crush on the streaming platform of your choice. Now with that, let's get to the interview. Cue the music.
It's Gear Over Beer. Gear Over Beer.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. I believe this is episode 8. The guest today, none other than Gray Gordon. How you doing, man?
I'm good, chilling.
Hell
Got a
yeah.
full belly. Just ate some very delicious lunch.
Hell yeah. That's what. So I wanted to bring you on here today because you just put out a new record called Columbus under the name Terminal Crush. It's out on Really Rad Records, correct?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. I was just honestly wanted to pick your brain on it and kind of get the behind the scenes view of it. So I was kind of curious why the name Terminal Crush and why not kind of put it under the Gray Gordon moniker name.
So specifically the moniker Terminal Crush is derived from a Lungfish song.
Okay.
The project doesn't sound anything like the band Lungfish, but I really like that band, and I had been kicking around using that moniker for some sort of project for a long time. And then when I recorded this album, it just seemed to fit, and it just made a lot of sense to use it in this particular musical outlet. As far as not releasing it under my name, I just kind of wanted to do it sans like any of the baggage that would come along with releasing it under my own name, just because I think to do that would create certain expectations for what it was going to sound like,
Sure.
or the extent to which I might pursue it in terms of like touring when that becomes a possibility again or anything like that. So I think just doing this divorced from any sort of like preconceptions or expectations that somebody might have just felt like freeing, especially because this wasn't a super intentional project. It wasn't something where I sat down and I'm like, I'm going to make a record. It just kind of fell together. And then once it was done, I was like, oh, I guess I should probably put this out. So none of it involved very much like planning. So I just wanted to do something that was like entirely independent of anything that I had done previously.
Okay. And that's what I saw, I believe, on Bandcamp. You recorded it all, you mixed it all, mastered it all, correct?
Yeah.
Was everything behind this project all you in terms of every instrument and its whole conception?
Yep,
Yeah.
for sure. I have a few solo projects where I just write and record everything at home. And this just became another one of those,
Okay. That's what kind of gear are you using for like home recording stuff? Are you keeping it super basic, or
the gear you see before you right now? An Audio Technica USB mic. And right now I've got a MacBook Pro because my Patreon money from my own podcast paid for a new computer, which is sick. But at the time when I recorded that record, I was using like a 2011 MacBook Air and a USB mic and my actual gear setup. I don't like DIing stuff at all. So I just used for bass and everything. I've got like an old Roland Jazz Chorus, which is like one of my favorite amps of all time. And I think it's way more versatile than people give it credit for. Like the guitar tones on the record are obviously very clean for the most part, so it makes sense to run guitars through a JC. But for just home recording stuff, like I record bass through that too, and I don't DI the bass. And I've had like various engineers hit me up and ask me, not on this record, but on some other stuff that I've done, like, yo, how do you get the bass tone? And I'm just like, I plug a Fender into my Jazz Chorus and I record it directly into an Audio Technica USB mic. And they're like, what? You don't DI it? You don't have better setup? I'm like, I don't know, man. I've just been fucking around with low quality gear for so long that I've figured out how to dial it in, I guess. So
I was gonna say, when you're kind
bare
of
bones setup.
Yeah, when you're kind of stuck with, not the best gear. Not to say that a Roland Jazz Course isn't the best gear. Do you
Right,
have
right.
the 120, or which model do you
I got
have?
I have the 77, so it's
The
a smaller
77.
version.
Wow, that's a pretty rare one to come across.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what
Yeah.
I got. I have the 120. I originally got
Mhm.
it like all the graduation money that I got when I graduated high school.
Yeah,
I was supposed to like save that and like use it for college, and to help me
right.
get through the first semester. I was like, fuck that, dude. I'm going and buying a Roland Jazz Course.
Hell yeah, it's one of the best amps of all time in my opinion. But I got that one from I was just scrolling through Craigslist looking for gear as I often do because people all the time people put stuff on there that they like don't know what they have or they're just desperate to get rid of it or whatever. And it was a dude who was selling like his dad's old gear
Uh huh.
and it was out in the boonies, like an hour out into the country. And so I drove out there because he had like a crazy price on it. It was like $250 for this JC77, and I was like, well, shit, like even if I don't have to pay. Like even if I pay the asking price for it, which I, as a rule, I try never to pay an asking price on
Yeah, of
Craigslist. But I
course.
was like,
Yeah.
even if I do pay the asking price, like this is a great fucking deal. So I drove out there, talked to him about it, and it needed like a little bit of work, just like the pots needed cleaning and stuff like that, but nothing that would like really cost a lot of money at all. And I talked him down to like 160 on it or something. And I was just like, all right, great doing business with you. And walked out of there with like a
The
vintage
biggest fucking grin.
JC77. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was
for
so
sure.
stoked. It's one of those situations where you have to not let on like how big you've just come up. Because I
Hmm.
do vintage resale. So I have to do the same thing when I like find like a piece that I know is worth like $300 that I'm about to get for $5. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is, and then, like cashiers will be like, oh, this is awesome. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. And I have to like really downplay
Tone
how
it down.
stoked I am. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had to do that because I've done the whole gear flipping thing I mean, I did that all throughout college, and that's uh, like how I pretty much built up my gear repertoire, where I
Right.
would start with, like a shitty Squire, and through
Hmm.
by the end of like 10 trays, I end up with a Gibson Les Paul,
Yeah. Yeah.
where it's
Exactly.
it's a weird train. And that's what the kind of the funny story with my jazz course is. So the one that I bought um, at the end of high school, had it all throughout college. And when I started playing, I was like, I just need something that, I mean, it takes pedals amazing, but I just need
Yeah.
something with a little bit more gain.
Hmm.
And I wasn't really using that. And I had a Vox AC30 at the time as well. And I was like, okay, I don't need both. And then I started working for Diamond Guitars and Diamond Amplification in
Hmm.
college, and got one of their amps. And I'm like, okay, I don't need three fucking amps.
Right.
I guess I'll let go of the Roland. And I sold it. And as soon as I did it, I regretted it. Um,
Yeah.
but I was like, you know what? I think somehow I'll come across another one and it'll be perfect. And I was working in the guitar shop that I worked at in college, and a guy comes in. He's like, "Hey, I want to buy this amp, and I want to play like some metal stuff, and the amp I have right now just really isn't working out." I was like, "Well, what do you have?" He's like, "A Roland Jazz Course." I was like, "Yeah,
That's so
no,
sick.
no shit, buddy. Of course that's not going to work." And so
Yeah.
he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I just need to get rid of it." He's like, I was like, "Oh, I used to have one of those. I regret selling it. I miss mine. I'd love to buy another one." He's like, "Well, I'll sell it to you for $300." I was
God
like,
damn, dude.
"Okay, here's the money,
Yeah,
please."
that's so sick. I love that. That's my come ups like that are like my favorite thing.
Hmm.
I got like an old vintage twin reverb for like 350 off of Craigslist as well that I really really regret selling.
Yeah, that's what I
Um
also sold my twin reverb, because that's what I had
yeah.
the Vox, and this is after I sold the Jazz Course. I had the Vox and the twin reverb, and that's
Mhm.
why I went to our main guitar amp tech at Diamond. I was like, I love both of these, but my back fucking hurts
I
carrying
know,
the.
dude.
And so he's like, he pointed me in the way of the Diamond Assassin, which is a little lunchbox head, but
Right
can
on.
do anywhere from Fender clean tones to straight gent tones. It's like the most versatile amp I've ever used,
That's sick.
and it's hard to think that I'll go back to anything else for
Word.
unless I'm doing like a clean tone specific setting
Right.
where the jazz course is
Yeah.
king.
Right, for
Uh,
sure.
so I saw that the Columbus you originally recorded back in like 2019, right? And I think
Mhm.
you even had like the album art like posted on your Instagram like last year. So what made you want to put it out now?
It's actually, it wasn't any, it didn't like arise from a desire to put off releasing it or anything. I think it's just like the nature of album cycles and like trying to get a label on board and then going through the process of like getting stuff pressed, setting up enough time so there's like a lead up before release, so we have time to like send it out to press outlets and stuff like that, and working with a label, like they want to do like a proper rollout, whereas me, I would just drop it and just be like, here's a record, you know what I mean? Like that's how I do a lot of stuff, because I have very little regard for like album cycles and press cycles, and also am like 100% not business savvy in any way, which is why I don't and have never made a living playing music and never will. So yeah, I think it was just that process just taking a long time. I wrapped the album up, like actual recording, probably around this time last year. And shortly, I mean, before I even finished the record, I just posted like a clip of one of the songs, and like a 30-second clip, and Really Rad hit me up and was just like, hey, like, I'm a fan of your other projects. I know I've only heard like 30 seconds of this, but it sounds dope. Can we put this out? And I was just like, yeah, I mean, if you feel confident agreeing to put something out based on the strength of a 30-second clip, then by all means, go for it. So by the time I finished it up, got the art, got the layout, and then, you know, we were working with the labels, just like when they could afford to get all of the materials together for pressing, all that kind of stuff, you know, just trying to coordinate several people's schedules. It just ended up being nearly a year until it actually came out. That's just kind of how that shit goes sometimes.
Yeah. That's what I think my personal favorite is Ring, which was the lead single. In my personal opinion, that's like my song of the year right now, where like I haven't been able to like put it off replay. To the point where like my girlfriend is like, okay, we need to pick a new song to start listening to every time we get in the car to go somewhere.
Damn, I'm sorry. I feel bad for your girl.
It's okay.
Give her my apologies.
She can deal with it. It's fine. But that's what another song, like a Painting of Birds, which I think is lyrically very brilliant storytelling.
Thank you.
And both of those songs kind of follow this song structure with no real chorus, where it's just like verse, verse, verse. Was that intentional, or is that a way of storytelling in your way of writing, or how would you explain that?
So as I kind of intoned like at the beginning of this, there was almost no intentionality with the writing process on this at all. I think it very much, for better or for worse, just ended up being like a long form journal entry, you know what I mean, set to music. I did like an interview where I kind of talked about it a little bit, but I had just gone through like a really jarring, like unexpected breakup. And at the same time, I was like dealing with confronting some health issues that I had been just kind of sweeping under the rug for the past several years, and like finally going to see doctors and like getting MRIs and trying to like figure out what was going on with my body. So it was just like, it was so many factors just coalescing to create this perfect storm of feeling incredibly sorry for myself for a few months stretch there in like summer and fall of 2019. I don't know how to not write songs like when I'm in that zone. Like it's just kind of what I gravitate to. It's not an intentional thing. It's literally like a compulsion, right? Like I don't know how to stop myself from making music. It's a lot of the time it's not like I think some people view it as a cathartic process, which it can be for me for sure, or a hobby or like a labor of love. But for me, it's just like, this is the only thing I know how to do. And it's the only way that I feel like I can effectively like move through my feelings and communicate. So yeah, the songwriting on it was just an extension of that. It was just like kind of whatever came out. I just like was like, all right, cool. This feels right. And then put it to tape and put it on a record pretty much. I guess if I had to draw analogs to like sonic analogs, definitely pulling from like the sun kill moon philosophy of songwriting, in which it's just this like ongoing narrative structure. There's not a lot of mind paid to traditional song structure or like pop song structure, like verse, chorus,
Yeah.
verse. It's just like a heavy narrative focus, where the music is almost sort of like an incidental side effect of like the way that the ideas are being communicated. It's a necessary facet of the product, but it's like not necessarily the focus, you know?
Yeah. And that's why I think it's a really hard, at least for me as a musician, it's like, and in terms of mentally trying to get into that space to write songs. Cause I know like my best work is when I'm in this weird mind funk where I can really dive in
Hmm.
and pour myself out into a song
Yeah.
versus not wanting to actually feel that way, because then I'm actually mentally healthy in that sense. It's a
Right.
very weird power struggle. At least it is for me, where like when I went through my last breakup, it was funny. Our bass player was like, dude, I know this fucking sucks, but you were going to write such a good record right now. I can promise you that. I'm like, I guess, but
Yeah, no, for sure. And I don't like to play into the tropes of like depressed musician writing songs about a breakup. Like
mhm,
as a 30-year-old man, like I think I have the self-reflective abilities to understand that these things are just like chapters in a life and they just happen. And like I don't get into the same headspace that I did when I was 20 years old, where I thought it was the end of the world and it's the
mhm,
last time I was ever going to love somebody or anything like that. So I think a lot of the pretense surrounding like romance is totally gone from my brain and like my perception of like romantic relationships in general. But for what it's worth, like it still sucks. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it feels just as bad every time. Like no matter how much like those thoughts are present, like in the forefront of your mind, where you have like the self-awareness to realize like this isn't that, you know, I don't need to be that dramatic about this. Like I'm gonna move on in a year, I'm gonna
mhm,
feel fine. It's not a big deal. I still just for whatever reason, like I said, it's just I have a compulsion to write songs and like it helps me move through stuff quicker. It's just like a good I mean, it's very cliche, but it's just like it's an excellent form of therapy for me to help me move through whatever it is I'm feeling at any given time. So, you know, I just honor those feelings as like corny as they may be, and I'm just like, oh, I'm gonna write some you know 7 dumb love songs, and I'm gonna be chill after this. You know.
yeah. That's what the one lyric at the end of Ring, where it says, "But if Judgment Day comes, swallowed up by the sun, I'll think of you as I'm fading." I remember
Hmm.
listening to that for the first time and like turning to my girlfriend and be like, "Fuck," and like I don't know, it's it's really weird how you probably wrote that as very specific, thinking about this, but just how broad that can go. And I think that's kind of
Hmm.
like the power of music that is really cool and can touch so many people.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's dope. I haven't talked about this record to people a lot at all. I've done like one, not even an interview. I mean, it was just like they sent an email like
Hmm.
formatted with some questions, and I did like a song by song breakdown where I like wrote 3 to 5 sentences about each track and gave a little bit of background on them and contextualized them a little bit more. But that's dope. Yeah, like I said, I haven't actually like talked to people very much about this record, so I've always enjoyed hearing from people in regards to my own music and like their interpretation of a
Hmm.
line or whatever. But yeah, I mean, as you already pointed out, that is like a beautiful thing, is like the potential for the universality of lyrics or music, and like just this massive, like ever unfolding plethora of different ways that people can interpret them and relate to them. Like I think that's obviously like the that's like the cornerstone of like music's universal appeal, you know?
Hmm. That's what. How has the reception been to this record? Has it been more than you've expected, less than you expected, right in the middle?
Um, yeah, that's hard to say. I try not to go into any release with a whole lot of expectations.
Hmm.
Especially like I said, you know, this isn't my career. It's just like a
Yeah.
thing that I do. So I'm not super invested in like the outcome of a release. Like if people like it, that's dope. If people don't like it, that's also fine.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal to me either way. Um, I would say it's probably been better if I had to say it's probably been better than I anticipated it would be. It seems like people are really connecting with it. It might just be that I don't know, 2020 has evoked a lot of latent melancholy in people.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this record is not remotely topical, but I think a lot of people are just like very in their heads. And this is like an introspective record. And I released it on like the first day of fall, which is
Yeah.
fitting, I guess. It's a very fall record. So, yeah, I think it just hit at the right time that it's like connecting with more people than I anticipated it might, you know?
And were you worried about releasing this during this whole weird pandemic where the music industry isn't, or did it really not matter to you?
Nah, it didn't matter to me at all. I don't give a shit. Like I said, I have no vested interest in like the financial returns or like the
Yeah.
critical response. It's just like I made this record. If you like it, here it is, you know. So
Do you have plans to maybe when shows finally become a thing again to play these songs live, or is that something that you're like, I kind of want to keep it just as its own entity as a record?
that's a good question. I've kind of talked to the label about it because like they approached me about doing like maybe like a quarantine live session sort of deal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the problem is, like as I was talking about earlier, with this sort of just being this almost even musically, it being like a stream of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
project. I just sort of like twisted knobs into tunings and then started and like threw a capo somewhere on a guitar and started like playing a riff and was like none of those songs were written in more than one session and all of them were recorded right after writing them. So I would like finish the song and be like, okay, that's done. I'm gonna like put it to tape right now. And then I haven't ever played any of them again after that. So,
Do
and
you
like they,
remember how to play them?
no, and I don't remember how to play any of the songs at all. And it's super atypical. In terms of like, I never fuck with alternate tunings really.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a real like 90s indie rock dude where I'll just like, we're tuning a half step down, no capo, let's fucking play a Weezer riff.
Yeah.
Or a Guided by Voices riff or a Sebadoh riff, like really uncomplicated, you know. So and for this, it is like absolutely the opposite. It's like, okay, cool, I'm gonna tune to like C sharp open, capo it on 6, but it was totally just done spur of the moment, like, oh yeah, this sounds good. Or I would even like, there was a few instances in which I looked up like a Sun Kill Moon tuning and was like, oh yeah, that song's in a really dope tuning, I'm gonna tune it to this. And I didn't annotate any of the like tracks. I didn't like
Mm-hmm.
write what they were tuned to or where I capoed them or anything. So I'm sure if I could figure out what fucking tuning they're in and where the
Yeah.
capo was at, I could figure it out by ear again. But the chances of me being able to do that are like slim to none. So I would kind of like to assemble a band and play these songs, but like whether I can actually pull that off logistically is yet to be seen.
Yeah, that's what it's kind of been weird. My band, like our whole first record was all half step.
Mm-hmm.
This second album that we released back in February started to kind of do some open tunings. And now that I'm in quarantine, or just during like this whole pandemic time where I've been at home, not really being able to hang out with my bandmates and write, it's like, all right, well, I guess I'll just sit at home and demo stuff. And, you know, you can only play so many chords in half step until you're like, fuck, I can't
Yep.
come up with anything right now. So I've been messing around with open tunings. And I'm
Yep.
also finding that same thing where I'm like, oh, I write it, I record it instantly, and I don't write down whatever the fuck it was. And
Mm-hmm.
now I'm just like, well, maybe one day I'll figure that out.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm not like I have no idea when touring's going to start again,
Mm.
so I'm not rushing into that process. Plus, like revisiting the songs is not necessarily like a super pleasant activity for me. Like they were all
Mm-hmm.
written and, you know, obviously during a period of time when I was like in a very bad headspace, and I'm in a very good headspace, all things considered. You know, the year being what it is, I'm in as good a headspace as I probably could be. So I'm not like rushing to like jump back into those songs, you know.
Yeah, for sure. So that's another thing I wanted to talk about is like the Fort Wayne music scene. So you're from Fort Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Fort Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I live in Chicago now. And it was actually kind of funny. I was talking to one of my friends here in Chicago, and I was like, yeah, I'm having someone from Fort Wayne come on the show. And she was like, oh, who? I was like, Gray Gordon. She's like, oh, I went to high school with him.
Oh,
And,
really weird.
Yeah, it's Alex Riley. That's who
Oh
it
yeah.
is.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
Alex Riley.
Yeah, that's what she lives down the street from me, and her mom and my mom are friends, so it's kind of been like a friendship that we've just kind of had for many years now. But as soon as I said that, she's like, "Oh, I know who that is." That's weird.
Yeah, that's wild. Very small
Um,
world.
yeah. So what's your kind of take on the Fort Wayne music scene? Because I've kind of been out of Fort Wayne for the past, I I mean, since I graduated high school, I haven't been in Fort Wayne. I went to Ball State, so I was indulged in the Muncie music scene.
Hmm.
Now that I've graduated, I've moved to Chicago, which I haven't really. I mean, I've come to Chicago for shows, so I kind of know around here, but I never got to really see what the Muncie music scene, or not Muncie, but Fort Wayne music scene was like. So I was
Yeah.
kind of wondering what your take on that was.
It's I mean, it's like an incredibly small and like insular scene for sure. But I've been working super hard, like along with a handful of other people, to try and reinvigorate it over the last couple of years. Obviously, before like Corona and everything threw a wrench in the works on that front. But so the house that I live in is a spot called the Bug House.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's on the south side. It's a huge, like, old colonial home with like a big basement. And as you well know, I'm sure rent in Fort Wayne is crazy cheap. And
Exactly.
this is like a 5 bedroom, 3 bathroom house, and the whole house is $1,000. So I mean, it's just like absurd, and it's on the south side. So like, there are a certain demographic of people who are scared to like move to this side of the city, even though it's literally fine.
Yeah.
Um, you hear gunshots sometimes, and like keeps the rent down,
Yeah.
so so
Well,
like
that's
me and 4 other people.
oh, I was just
Go
gonna say
ahead.
it's funny because I was from the north side. I went to Carroll,
Hmm.
so like
Oh, okay,
I
word.
understood I know the percent, or the mindset that you're thinking of. Like, oh, we don't want to go downtown. I mean, I
Yeah,
live in Chicago and I hear gunshots all the time, and never
right,
once am I like, oh, like
right, yeah, yeah,
I don't, yeah.
yeah.
But
So
carry on.
yeah, so like, 5 of us live here, so rent is like absurdly fucking cheap, and we have this big basement. And after we moved in a couple years ago, it occurred to me that we should probably do shows, because I've been booking shows in Fort Wayne consistently for like 13 years, I want to say.
Okay.
I booked my first show when I was like 17, and I've just kind of never stopped. So it ebbs and flows, like it's peaks and valleys, because it's such a small community that like it's not so much privy to like what's going on nationally. It's hyper self-contained, and there are years where people are hyper invested and starting bands, and then there are sometimes several year periods where like nobody's interested in coming to shows or like playing guitar music at all.
Hmm.
Luckily, over the past couple of years, it's very much been the opposite. Like, attendance has been wild, and I think it helps that like I've been playing punk and hardcore and indie rock and shit, and booking shows and playing shows and touring for long enough that I know enough people that I can bring through dope bands. So I've tried to curate like only rad shit, basically, not book
Yeah, for
anything like
sure.
weak and lame. Bring through like most of what I book, certainly not exclusively. A lot of what I book is like punk and hardcore, because that's what I'm
Hmm.
most invested in. So I brought through like Regional Justice Center, which is like a bigger band certainly right now, within that sort of that portion of like the hardcore scene.
Yeah.
That brought out like a bunch of kids. I mean, we've had a few shows where we've had like 150 kids in the basement.
I was gonna say,
um,
you guys brought Origami Angel through.
yeah, Origami
And
Angel and
that's
Short Fictions. Yep.
mhm.
Yep. And actually, Alex Martin from Short Fictions is the person who like has done all the press for this
Oh, really?
record, for the Terminal Crush record as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Alex is the homie, so shout out to them. But yeah, I brought through Origami Angel and Short Fiction. So yeah, and that show, I thought like that show was like 2 days after Christmas. So when
Hmm.
Alex and I were talking about it, I was like, yeah, like, Fort Wayne has good attendance for sure, but like, I'm not sure what it'll be like a couple days after the holiday. And Alex was like, nah, it's going to be good. Like,
Yeah, that's how I almost drove from Muncie, which
yeah,
I that was like one of my biggest regrets in terms of shows that year that I didn't go to, because I was
yeah,
like, you're telling me they're playing in Fort Wayne, but they're not playing like Indianapolis at like the Hoosier Dome. I was like, the Bug House, what is this? And I
yeah.
found out and then saw it was you. I was like, oh, so this is going to be a dope ass show.
Yeah, yeah, it was fucking wild. It was lit. So many kids came out. That was like, it wasn't the most packed the house has been, but it was
Up
really,
there.
really packed. Yeah, there was probably 150 kids for that show,
S-
um, in a
Do you
basement.
still? Yeah, that's. I mean, that's a good ass number for in a
Yeah,
basement.
yeah.
Do you still indulge in that emo scene at all, or do you listen to anything like that?
Not a lot of the contemporary stuff. I
Hmm.
think short fictions is really good. I like them a lot, especially because they incorporate some other sonic influences outside of just like classic sort of noodly Midwest emo. There's like
Hmm.
some obvious like 90s indie rock influence in there, some obvious shoegaze influence. Origami Angel, I was actually like like mad impressed with.
Yeah,
Um,
it's kind of annoying how it's just the two of them and they do all that.
I know. Yeah, I was when Alex sent me over like the info for the tour package. I kind of wrote it off at first. Like, I mean, I was going to do it because Alex is the homie.
Hmm.
But they were like, "Oh yeah, they're kind of noodly emo stuff," and I was like, "All right, well, like that's not my scene. It's never really been my scene outside of a handful of like '90s Midwest emo bands. Like that's not
Yeah,
really my shit." And I listened to him and was just like, "Holy shit, the songwriting is like so undeniably good."
yeah.
I can't hate on this at all. And live, they like really fucking pull it off too.
And they have such a big sound for
Hmm.
just the two of them, which
Yeah, for sure.
I is what I've come to really appreciate about them.
Yeah, and they also are not like they're not weemp wompy noodly emo. You know, it's not in
Hmm.
the vein of like modern baseball and stuff like that that never really connected with me.
Hmm.
It's very much pulling for at least to my ear more from like cap and jazz and
Yeah.
like that classic like really shreddery
Hmm.
90s like Midwest emo stuff that doesn't often get imitated well, or like bands that did that years later like Algernon Cadwallader and stuff like that.
That's what I think. It's a weird time. Like that's what my band is like. Emo, whatever the fuck you want to call it. There's like the thousand different subgenres of whatever this is, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a headache to be quite honest to like keep up with. You're like, oh, I mean, there is is the kind of the cool thing about it is that there is so much diversity in terms of like, oh, there's a little bit of you can see where everyone's drawing their inspirations from. Um,
Yeah.
but also at the same time is can be overwhelming as shit.
Yeah, I can imagine for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also it's like I mean, I think there's obvious emo influence on the Terminal Crush record, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, I think it's most obviously pulling from '90s slowcore stuff like
Yeah.
Seam and Low and Codeine and shit like that. But there's like, especially in Ring, like to me,
Yeah.
that is just like and serenading era Mineral like all
Hmm.
day, like
Yeah.
just 100% like a Mineral song. So I think coming up and like cutting my teeth on a lot of that '90s emo stuff, like it's inescapable. When I write soft music, it's always gonna like eke its way in there somehow, you know?
And that's the thing that the Terminal Crush record kind of reminded me of more your early stuff, like your first EP under
Hmm.
the Grey Gordon name, um,
Yeah.
and where it's more singer songwriter, and then you kind of transitioned into a full band into
Hmm.
your first full length, which is how I first heard about you when I lived in Fort Wayne and when I was still in high school, I worked at Entourage
Oh,
Music
okay.
in the
Word. Yeah.
mall.
Yeah.
And so that's what I worked with, like Chase
Hmm.
Huglin.
Yep.
And that's what, I mean, he's kind of the guy who's like, you need to check out this, and kind of push me towards more the emo scene or whatever the fuck you want to call it scene.
Hmm.
And that's just like, yeah, this guy's from here.
Hmm.
And there's a song. I was like, oh my God, there's a song called Indianapolis 2008. I was like,
Yeah.
something I can finally relate to.
Right. Right.
Someone being from Indiana and all this. Um, was it that same year? Because you released that in 2014. No,
Hmm.
was it the next year that you went on Warp Tour?
Yeah, I think it was the next year for sure.
So, as a musician, everyone's like, I want to go on Warp Tour. That's like the goal. Is that as mentally fucking exhausting as it seems?
Yeah, I mean, especially for a dude like me who is like not a Warped Tour aficionado
Yeah.
by any stretch of the imagination. I'm like, that's not the scene I grew up
Yeah,
in, and it's not the scene I grew up aspiring to be in by any
for sure.
stretch. So yeah, like you mentioned, like the Terminal Crush record being evocative of like some of my early material, which I think is apt just because with that early stuff, I mean, I was in my late teens, early 20s when I started doing that. So I mean, I
Hmm.
was a kid And I was very actively trying to pull from like classic Midwest emo with that, like Joan of Arc, Cap and Jazz, Braid, especially, and not even just the Midwest stuff, but Promise Ring, Texas is a Reason. All of that shit was like my primary influence for that stuff, and kind of like spitting from the Pacific Northwest. All of that shit was just like, yeah, this is like an emo project. And at the time, like the emo revival thing was still very much in its nascency when I started doing
Mm-hmm.
that shit. Like I was pretty early on that train just because I was like young at the time and super plugged into what was going on. So I got into like Grown Ups, who are from Indiana, amazing
Mm-hmm.
band if you haven't fucked with them. That now 2 out of 3 of the members of Grown Ups are in Cloakroom now. But they were in like a kind of twinkly emo band that was totally
Okay.
channeling like Cap and Jazz and that kind of stuff, back in the like mid to late aughts. So I got into that. The Reptilian from Michigan, Snowing from PA, all of that stuff. And I was like, oh, holy shit, this is like, there are all these bands doing this, like an interpretation of the emo stuff that I like grew up loving from the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to hop on that. And then like shortly thereafter, I got signed to No Sleep. And then the emo revival thing became this huge fucking phenomenon where there was like articles in the Village Voice about it. And every music publication was running stories on like Evan and Into It Over It and all of that
Mm-hmm.
shit. So yeah, I got picked up by No Sleep, and then that one thing led to another, and like I never, kind of same deal with like that project as with the Terminal Crush stuff. It was very much just I was playing in punk and hardcore bands and metal bands, and I wanted to do something different and something that I wasn't beholden to like a group of people. I could just write and like do whatever I wanted individually, and then it just got more popular than I expected it to.
Mm-hmm.
People liked it and people were pushing me to like play shows, so I started playing shows. And then No Sleep reached out to me and was like, hey, do you want to sign to the label? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I didn't meet, and then I got a European tour offer, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to Europe with this shit now. And like all of this shit just snowballed without any sort of like, I had no intentionality behind it with
Yeah.
that project at any juncture, really. I even after I got signed to No Sleep and shit, I just like when I recorded that full band record, I was just like, okay, well, I have money now to like do this. Like the label's paying for it. I went and recorded it with this dude Ben from the band Kind of Like Spitting, and I was like, well, fuck it. Like I got the money to record this record. I'm just gonna do like a big '90s indie rock, like super chunk sounding record.
Yeah.
Recorded that. Didn't tour in support of it at all. Was still playing like singer songwriter shit. And then I got asked to do Warp Tour by the dude who was the stage manager, Brian, for the Acoustic Basement that year. He just sent me an email and was like, do you want to do this again? Like I didn't submit for it. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have any aspirations to get on it. He just was like, yo, I like your stuff. Like, come do this. So I said yes again, because it was like a summer's worth of gigs and pay and like
Yeah.
playing shows, so. But like growing up, that I didn't go to Warp Tour, you know what I mean? Like I went a couple years when I got like free passes because I had like press passes,
Mm-hmm.
because I was like on the high school paper. But I watched like 5 bands. I watched like Throwdown and like Alkaline Trio and Bad Religion. Like I was
Yeah.
like there for like the punk and hardcore bands, which were few and far between by the time I even went to my first one. And then after that, I would go if a homie was on the tour and could get me in free, but like it just wasn't my shit. So going on that tour with no history of like emotional attachment to that tour, no
Mm-hmm.
aspirations to ever be on the tour, and being a singer songwriter, like playing a tour filled with like shitty mall metal bands like fucking Attila and shit, who couldn't be more like anathema to my tastes and interests
Yeah.
musically. Like I wanted to fight all those dudes, you know what I mean? Like shit sucked. It was horrible being bombarded with that every day. And you're just surrounded by all of these people who are wearing like big hats and flowy clothes, who are 35 years old, like wearing eye makeup, talking to 15-year-old girls. And I was just like, what the fuck is this? This is like bizarro world. Because
Yeah.
I come from punk and hardcore like that. Like I'm a hardcore kid, like straight up, like dyed in the wool. That's the scene that I come from. That's the scene I'm still invested in. So like, and my brushes with that world had only ever just been like incidental. Like I'd been in the same room with some of those people because homies bands had gotten popular or whatever, or I was friends with certain bands, but like I had never had to spend any sort of pure, like serious period of time around those people. And it was absolutely like emotionally and mentally exhausting. It
I
was
believe it.
horrible.
How long was
It's
that tour? Or how
like
many dates?
Like it was like 2.5 months, and there shows almost every day. I was in a bus with like some metalcore band that I
I was
didn't
gonna say,
know any of them.
I was gonna say, did you have to drive yourself, or did they provide any kind of?
No, they don't provide shit. I had to buy
Yeah, that's
onto
what
a
I thought.
bus. I had to
Yeah,
buy onto a bus. So like that's the other thing is like it wasn't even as lucrative as it should have been because I was paying like
yeah.
$500 a week just to like have a bunk spot in a bus. So
Is that better or worse than touring out of a van? I mean, when we tour out of my Jeep Compass, and
yeah,
you sleep kind of sitting up, kind of a thing, if you have to, if you're not sleeping on a hardwood floor. But
I mean in terms of like just the actual um amenities provided to you on the road, like touring in a bus is way sicker.
yeah,
But being in a bus with like
douchebags, kind of.
seven random like metalcore dudes who like are like low key like weird racist sexist like just freaks, and
Yeah,
not in the least cool way that I could possibly employ that word. um Sucked really fucking bad. It was like exhausting. I just stayed in my bunk the entire tour basically and just read books. And like I had a few homies on the tour, and I made a few unexpected friends on the tour because like in high school I hated like Silverstein and like all of those bands, Census Fail
hmm,
and that type of shit like was not my shit at all because I was a punk kid. I was like a hardcore
yeah,
kid. So that stuff was, again, it was like anathema to me. I clowned it super hard. But then I was wearing like a Floor Punch shirt one day, and or like a 10-yard fight shirt, and Buddy from Census Fail was rocking a Floor Punch shirt, and I didn't know who the fuck he even was. And he was like, "Oh, nice shirt," and I was like, "Yeah, you too, man." And we like got to talking, and he was like, "Oh, who are you?" And I told him. He's like, "Oh, right on. I play in Census Fail," and I ended up becoming friends with like him and like Shane from Silverstein and stuff, who were all also just like dudes who were into like hardcore and punk, who
yeah.
just ended up in like successful like pop punk bands or pop punk and emo bands. Um, so I made a few homies on the tour, like unexpected homies for sure. And I had a few like friends that I already like. I had like some label mates on the tour and shit. But overall, I mean, it was a horrible, horrible experience. I would never do it again.
Um, so it's kind of to transition out of that. Um, well, I guess it kind of has to do with it in terms of like what you play live or when you were playing gigs. It was
Mhm.
primarily acoustic, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Were you doing any kind of like full band stuff with like the Grey Gordon stuff, or well,
yeah,
you also play in a hardcore band, correct?
yeah. I play in several.
Yeah,
I'm literally in like 10 bands.
that's rough. Is that mentally exhausting to have to be committed to that?
Yeah, it is, but it also is just like, what the fuck else would I do with my time? This is the
Yeah.
only thing that I'm remotely good at. So
Do you find it hard to like when you're writing to like transition from that mode to like slowcore, hardcore, or whatever genre you're kind of writing, or is it just all kind of natural?
yeah, not really. Like I said, this is the only thing really I think that I naturally excel at on any level.
Hmm.
I'm not naturally good at anything else. I'm not athletic. Um, I'm not mathematically inclined whatsoever. I'm basically a decent verbal and written communicator, and like a decent songwriter, and like that's it. That's my skill set. So so no, I find it pretty easy to bounce back and forth from band to band is in terms of writing. That's not challenging. Balancing like the commitment of being in those bands and trying to
Hmm.
juggle like the logistics of like, oh fuck, I gotta pitch this record to this label and pitch this record to this other label, and I have to coordinate when all these things are coming out. That shit sucks. But
Yeah.
actually like writing and playing in the bands is cool. But yeah, I was playing in like a couple hardcore and metal bands around that time too.
Okay. In terms of like, well, do you want to give us a rig rundown, or and does that rig kind of change depending on what like what you're playing with different bands or different genres, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it changes. It changes a lot for
Like
sure.
I assume you're not using the jazz course on any hardcore records.
No, not really. It's I had a well, I did actually. So for the band that I was playing in more actively during that time, I play in a band still called Parasitic Twins. That's just like it's like 80s hardcore stuff, like OG US 80s hardcore, mixed with like some more noisy elements, shit like Piss Jeans and Mets and stuff like that, and even like 90s noise stuff like Jesus Lizard. And I was actually using a very close cousin to the jazz chorus at that time, because as you intoned earlier, they take pedals super well. They take effects super well. And the tone that I was utilizing in that band, especially at that time, was not like crunchy, gainy hardcore stuff. It's like 80s
Yeah.
hardcore. So to have some like clarity on the actual chords is essential, especially because I'm mostly utilizing like bar chords and shit.
Yeah.
So you want to hear all that. So at that time I was using a Roland GA 120, which
Okay.
is a super close cousin to the JC. It's basically just the JC without the chorus channel. And I got it for a crazy good deal. I bought it off of a dude who happened to live in Indiana, who used to be in Nine Inch Nails.
The
Yeah,
fuck?
very, very weird. And he had one sitting around from, I guess, his Nine Inch Nails touring days. And I bought it off him for like a couple $100 years ago. So I was using that at the time for the hardcore stuff that I was playing. And then I was also doing, I did like a heavy like alt rock band called Wicker Wolves. And for that, I was using a number of different setups. I was actually using the JC for a while with that, because it worked pretty well for what we were doing. After a while, I switched to, like, I was using a Randall setup for a while, actually, which a lot of people scoff at, but it was like the same Randall setup that like Dimebag would use in Pantera back in the day. And
Okay.
the head actually has like a crazy, super dope gain channel.
Okay.
It sounds fucking sick, and it's a lot more versatile than people would expect. I'm never using stuff that people expect me to. Like on that Wicker Wolves record that we did, like my main distortion pedal was an HM2.
Okay.
Which if people who are familiar with like old Boss pedals will know, like an HM2 is most famously used by all like the Scandinavian death metal bands from the 90s, specifically like Dismember and Entombed. But it was actually utilized a lot by some of the early 90s shoegaze acts. Like Swerve Driver used it a bunch. I'm pretty sure Kevin Shields from My Bloody Valentine utilized it sometimes. They're a way more versatile pedal than people, I think, really understand. So like, yeah, I used a classically a death metal pedal on like the alt rock stuff that I was doing around that time. I was using the twin reverb for various stuff around that time as well. I mean, yeah, doing like a comprehensive gear rundown would be tough because, like I said, I legitimately play in like 10 bands. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of different stuff. I play in like a heavier band right now, and I'm using a homie setup that's like an old vintage Fender Bassman with run through like an orange cab. And again, it's a weird fucking setup for what we're doing because we're playing like heavy hardcore.
Yeah.
Again with an HM2, but I'm using like a semi-hollow telly with humbuckers in it. It's so weird. It's a really weird, but it sounds great. So
yeah, I mean, if it sounds good, it really doesn't matter how you get there.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So what were you using for like Terminal Crush? I think we kind of talked about that. You were using like the JC. Were you using any particular pedals or were you using the Telly or?
Yeah, I was using a Telly on that. Yep. I switched between the Telly and then my J Mascis Jazzmaster with that, because there are a couple parts on that record that are like overdriven and high gain. And like that was the perfect guitar for that, especially because I actually don't have the stock pickups in it. There are some Antiquity 2s in there.
Okay.
A little bit more high gain pickup.
Yeah.
So for the overdriven parts on the record, I used the J Mascis Jazzmaster, and yet again, the old reliable, I used an HM2 pedal on there.
Okay.
Just to add that like fuzzy gain channel. But the majority of that one was done via the jazz chorus. No real pedals, honestly. It was mostly just like, I mean, the clean tones on that amp are incredible.
Yeah.
And even the built-in like reverb channel is great. So I just utilized that, and actually for that one I was mostly using a different telly. I was using a telly with like single coils.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. That's what I just sold probably a couple months back, my J Mascis, and I immediately regret selling that too. So I kind of get in this constant pattern where I'm like, oh, I don't even play it anymore. I don't need to buy it, or I don't need to own it, so I'll sell it and then immediately regret it. So I've been on the market for another Jazz Master.
Yeah, man, I regret almost all of the gear that I've ever sold, to tell you the God's honest truth. It's always been just, mostly for me, it's been during periods of where I'm just like, I'm hurting, I'm about to go on a tour and I need an extra $500 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'm just like, I regret it the minute I get back from the tour. I had not that these are expensive. I mean, I could replace one easily, but I got this one for free and then ended up selling it. But I used to have like a Dan Electro Dead on 67. And those things are so fun. I love them. I mean, it's a very trebly tone. They have like the lipstick pickups in them. But,
yeah, I was gonna say that's why I used to have the Hodad.
Yeah, okay.
Which funny, I got that for free, and because someone was like, it doesn't work, and I was like, oh, one of the pickups just needs to be replaced, and it could use new pods. Yeah, and so I did that, and it was a really funky guitar. And that's what, like, it even had like that phase where you could like put it in and out of phase, like on the guitar. Those are cool guitars. And that's another one that, like, I think I ended up selling for like $250. Yeah. I'm like, what did I need, that $250 for at that time? Yep. Did I really need it?
For sure. Yeah. I think about that guitar all the time, especially now that I'm in more bands than I was at the time that I sold it. And I'm like more actively doing a lot of just like solo recording projects at home. I have so many applications for that guitar now. Whereas at the time I was still playing in a lot of bands, but I was playing in a few that were actively touring and playing out more frequently. So I didn't need to have this array of setups because I had a more homogenous sound that applied between like the various different projects I was touring with. But now, since I spend all of my time at home, basically, I'm just like, dude, I have so many applications for this guitar. It would come in so handy. And I regret it all the time.
That's what we kind of talked about it earlier when we were talking about flipping gear, how you do that for vintage. So you run, is it, Can I Kick It? Can I Kick It Vintage?
Can I Kick It Vintage?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I don't know why, but I've always just gravitated towards like things that I'm into. I'm super, super into, and I learned the minutia, like the ins and outs of everything about it. Be it music or like nerd stuff like comics and anime or clothes. And I've always been into clothes ever since I was like a little kid. But I also, like I've said several times, I come from like a punk and hardcore background, and my family is super working class, never had a lot of money. So it was never like I was into designer clothes and shit, but I like them aesthetically. And I like especially being so invested in subculture and all the minutia of subculture and its history and like the social interplay of subculture with pop culture. Like clothing has always been an interesting component of that whole formula. So, and thrifting was always a big thing for me when I was a kid, just cause like once I started wanting to go out and find clothes and stuff, it's not like I had money to go to the mall and stuff. Like I had to walk down to the thrift stores a few blocks from my crib and just like find what I could find, like, oh shit, I just found a pair of Jordan 3s at the thrift. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So very early on, I started collecting stuff. There used to be a spot in Fort Wayne too called Retroactive that was run by this woman, Rose, this crazy old cat lady. And it was just a spot over on North Anthony by Wooden Nickel. That was just filled to the brim with clothes and like filled, like you could barely walk around in there. It was all vintage and you could find crazy stuff in there. The amount of shit that I got from there that I later gave to homies or like gave away when I outgrew it, that I could flip for hundreds and hundreds of dollars now, it blows my mind. Like I had OG Sonic Youth shirts, crazy shit. And all the stuff from her was, it was between $5 and $20 depending on what it was. Yeah. So I was just coming up like crazy, like OG 90s Weezer shirts, all sorts of shit. So like later down the road, as I had just been accruing all of these clothes over my lifetime, because my dad is into punk and hardcore and indie rock and shit, as well as my uncle. So I inherited a bunch of stuff from them. I have like, hell yeah. I have like OG Cockatoo Twins shirts, OG This Mortal Coil, Joy Division, and I got like a 1986 Dead Kennedys Kill the Poor shirt in the closet from my dad, like crazy stuff. Yeah. So like just coming up on all this stuff, like eventually it occurred to me that I could probably monetize this. And as I have said a few times, like music is not a career for me. I am not good at monetizing it at all. Because it is such a compulsion. It's so removed from like, I can't think about it. I cannot apply like a business mindset to it. It's impossible for me to do. So I've struggled like financially for most of my adult life because I've been like back and forth between tours. So I'll like come home to the machine shop for like 6 months, and which I hate every minute of. I want to fucking dunk my head in a river and just fucking extinguish my life. I hate like normal work. I hate it. I've been doing it since I was 16 intermittently, but I hate it. It's like it sets like every shred of my DNA ablaze with like fucking fury that I'm wasting my time doing something when I could be doing something like creative. It's like a pathological thing. Like I've talked to therapists about it, and like they'll always be like, yeah, well, everyone hates work. And I'm like, you don't understand.
I hate
work.
it. I cannot be here.
No, like it makes me want to legitimately kill myself. Like, and I'm not a dude who deals with a lot of suicidal ideation, but this makes me want to like blow my brains out. I have to like go do something. Like I'm gonna die eventually, and you want me to go fucking run a machine? Like this is inhumane. So like 5 years ago, it occurred to me as I was out thrifting, I was like, I could flip these clothes. I know, again, like I have no business acumen whatsoever. And growing up broke, like I'm very comfortable having a very small amount. Like I really just don't have material aspirations at all, which really has set off some people that I've dated because I'm like, well, I'm never going to have a fucking good job. Like if I have like an Xbox and like I can eat good food and I have enough money to like travel, I'm stoked. And like, as long as I can pay my rent, like I'm chilling. So yeah, it occurred to me like 5 years ago, I was like, I should like flip some of these fucking clothes. I have like Tommy Hilfiger jackets that I could sell for $300. So I started doing
that's a month's rent right there.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. In Fort Wayne, especially.
Yeah.
People always ask me like why I don't leave Fort Wayne. And I'm like, because I could pay $300 in rent and I can travel literally whenever I want to and afford to do it. Like, why would I move when I could live in New York and go nowhere ever, or I could live in Fort Wayne and buy a fucking train ticket to New York whenever I want. Like, no brainer for me. So like I've been doing it actively for like five or 6 years. But I was still like casual about it. I would have bursts where I would get more serious about it, but like touring and whatnot would get in the way. Relationships would get in the way. All sorts of other factors would get in the way. Whereas when this pandemic hit, I lost my job like right when the pandemic started, like back in March. And I was just like, well, you know what? Like, there's no better time. I have no excuse to not pursue this full time because I'm not doing fuck all. I can't get a job anywhere else. I'm not touring. I have a huge backstock of stuff that I have been neglecting listing for one reason or the other. So I just decided to like tackle it and jump into it. And was like, I'm just going to try and do this full time and see where I'm at in a year. And that was in August, like the very beginning of August, where I decided like, all right, I'm really, really going to get serious about this. And I've paid rent the past two months, just like exclusively off of selling vintage clothes. So it's going pretty well so far. I'm going to see how it goes, how it's going in another 6 months and another year. And I don't know, it seems to be steadily growing. My clientele seems to be like increasing. So it's dope.
I was going to say, maybe one day you fuck around and open up a shop in Fort Wayne or do whatever. I think that's the weird part, is where there's a lot of people who are like, I sell vintage clothes. And you're like, this is just a curated thrift shop is all this is. Where I see the shit that you're posting, you like go in depth. You're like, oh, it's this shirt from this year. And, like you actually know your shit.
Yeah, like I said, I get, for better or for worse, I get obsessive about that shit. Definitely for worse if you ask many of my partners who have like had to tell me to shut the fuck up while I was ranting about a specific battle in World War One. Just like, hey, like this particular battle. I literally had a partner one time stop me and say like, hey, look, I don't mean to be rude, but I don't give a fuck about what you're saying right now. And it's like, yo, that's fair.
Like, all right, fair enough. Dearly noted.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's what, to kind of wrap things up. this is like a segment that we do on every episode. It's called House Show Horror Story.
Okay.
Is there a particular show that comes to your mind where literally everything that could have gone wrong went wrong?
Yeah, I have a really good one for this actually.
Okay. I'm stoked.
And this one isn't, so it's not so much the show, it's more the aftermath of the show, which led to me being blacklisted from basically an entire city. And I did, and like, yo, I'm quick to cop when I fucked up. And like, I am well known as like a prolific dick. For sure. Like, I mean, we've talked about emo a lot in this, and we talked about like that Origami Angel show. There were motherfuckers that refused to come to that show because it was at my house. Like, especially the emo scene, like the contemporary DIY emo scene does not fuck with me. So I played this show in Savannah, Georgia in 2014. Yeah, 2014. It would have been around this time in 2014, actually. We may have just passed the like 6-year anniversary of this. I'll have to check my Facebook memories because there was a big fiasco about it. So we played this show in Savannah. It was me and this band, the Fossil Youth, and we were out on tour together. It was pretty early in the tour. It was a donation show, which I always take umbrage at a fucking donation show. Cause I've been running shows since I was 17, a lot of them house shows, and you fucking pay your $5 or $10 at the door. That just is what it is. If you're broke, I relate and you can pull me aside and I'm happy to like let you in or work out a deal. But as a general rule of thumb, everybody's paying their $5 because these bands like they have to make it to the next city. They got to eat, whatever. Yeah. You know? So donation shows fucking irk me already. So I'm like, I'm not feeling great about that, but I'm like, as the night wears on, there's a lot of fucking kids at the show. So I'm like, all right, this is dope. Kids watch my set, seem to be into it. Kids watch Fossil Youth set, seem to be into it. No one buys any fucking merch. Everyone's smoking cigarettes. Everyone's got 40 ounces, right? At the end of the night, woman who booked the show comes up and hands us, I think it was like $13 or something. And there was probably 90 to 100 kids at this show. I mean, it was fucking packed. And we're like, this is all you got from donations? And she's like, yeah, no, I'm sorry. Like, kids just like didn't have any money. And I'm just like, well, I mean, like everybody's like drinking. It's like they have money for like 6-packs. She's like, yeah, I know, but like I can't make them pay. And in my head, I'm just like, you can make them pay. Like, you can for sure. I do it all the fucking time. As both a booker and like as an artist, I've walked motherfuckers to the ATM before. Like, oh, hey, I don't think I have the money for the guarantee. Like, no, we're gonna go walk and get the money for the fucking guarantee because I just drove to Long Island and you promised me $150 and I booked the tour around this show. We're gonna go get my guarantee, right? So like, you can make motherfuckers pay. So, but I didn't make a big fuss about it at all. I was super polite. I was like, all right, it is what it is. I know how it goes. No big deal. I appreciate you putting on this show. Blah, blah, blah. Crashed at the house, left in the morning, right? And like later that day, I made a post on Facebook. I didn't say anything about the promoter. I didn't say anything about the city where the show was at, nothing about the venue. I just said something like, man, I just did some mental math and there were like 95 kids at the show last night. We got paid $13. So that amounts to like this many cents donation per kid. Yeah. Like, wild, right? And that's all I said. Didn't call out anybody involved with the show or even suggest where the show was. Like, nothing about it. And so then this woman who booked the show like calls herself out on my post and is like, I booked the show and this is why you only got paid $13, like blah, 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 blah. And like, you're being mad disrespectful right now. And I was like, so I just messaged her and I was like, hey, like, I'm sorry if you felt disrespected at all. Like, that was not my intention. That's why I didn't call you out. Like, I have no ill will. Like, you did what you could. I was just making a joke about a bunch of kids coming to a show and like not being able to donate. Like, it's just a phenomenon that happens a lot in DIY. So it was just like a thing I was joking about with friends. Like, no big deal. I feel no hard feelings, you know, whatever. And she was like, well, I do fucking feel hard feel. Like, she got heated about it. It was like, I don't give a fuck. Like, you should just be happy. She straight up hit me with the like, you should be happy to have the experience type shit. And I was like, yo, pause, motherfucker. We're not going to get into this shit right now. So she ended up making like a public Facebook post that was like, fuck this rock star motherfucker who needs, like, yo,
rock star.
$13. Like, I
Yeah.
don't, what the fuck are you talking about? So like all of these people from Savannah were like, fuck this motherfucker, like fuck him, and were like adding me on Facebook just to like leave comments and shit and be like, one of them called me a money grubbing worm. I've always wanted to do a shirt where I like have like a picture of my face on a worm.
On a worm?
Yeah, yeah. I've always wanted just like clutching wads of cash. But yeah, like it was absolutely wild. People were just like hitting my DMs like from this city, like fuck you, motherfucker. Don't ever come back to Savannah. And I'm like, yo, all of you weigh 100 pounds soaking wet. I could fucking kick you over, but that's neither here nor there. So I'm like laughing about it, kind of still just clowning them, just like being like, damn, I didn't know Savannah, Georgia was like a Mad Max wasteland where $13 made you a fucking rich like oil baron.
Yeah.
So I like just kept clowning him because especially at the age of 24, that's the person I was, where I would just dump fuel on a fire and just be like, fuck all these motherfuckers. All of you can suck me from the back. I don't give a shit. I'll fight the entire state of Savannah. I don't care. Or the entire city of Savannah. I don't care. So then like probably a year later, I went to try and book a show in Savannah, like through a totally different dude. And he was like, yeah, I'll set you something up. Hadn't heard back for like a week. And I like hit him up. I was like, hey, what's up with the Savannah show? And he's like, I'm gonna be honest with you, man. No one will book you here. like they've all heard that you're just like a piece of shit. And it was all from this fucking whack incident where I like didn't even do anything. And like totally got fucked on like didn't do shit. Like, and there's so many instances because like one of my bands is banned from like 4 venues and we totally did shit and it was like 100% warranted. But this was an instance where I'm like, I didn't even do anything. I like just clapped back at some like lunatic college student who called herself out. You know what I mean? Like I didn't even say shit about this woman. And then I tried again to book in Savannah like 2 years ago and it was the same deal. It was like, yeah, no one.
Maybe when the pandemic's over, I think it's finally time to give her the old college try. To get back to Savannah. That's ridiculous.
I think third try's a charm for sure. We're gonna book that Savannah show this next time around. I'm sure of it.
I'll make sure to make that drive from Chicago to Savannah just for that fucking gig, just to see the living hell that is that show. Just
it would be so sick if I showed up to Savannah and there was just like an army of like DIY emo kids ready to knuck up. That would be that's my dream.
What would be even better is if somehow you were on tour with another band and they just didn't even mention you and you just show up. I think that's the way you got to go about this one. You're like, what's up, motherfuckers? I've infiltrated your lair and I'm going to take this fucking city down.
Yeah, that's the move for sure. I always have fantasies about just like showing up to a spot where there are people like ready to fight me just because I'm like, what a good tour story. You know what I mean? And like, I do a podcast with my homie Nate called Demo Listen, where we listen, like people submit like mostly punk and hardcore, sometimes like indie and emo bands and stuff to us and metal. And it's generally like our first time hearing whatever they submit to us and we just react honestly to it. And sometimes we eviscerate shit and we're just like, this is the worst shit I've ever fucking heard in my life. This is clown shoes. And so there's like a growing, like I already like am a loudmouth. So there was like a handful of motherfuckers across the country that want to whoop my ass anyway. But then like, since the podcast is taken off,
people are like, I want to wreck this dude's. Yeah.
Especially like the maladjusted weirdos that you find like playing in hardcore bands. Like, you know, these are not like by and large thinking people a lot of the time. They're just like, they're at the fringes of society, like myself, just outcasts and weirdos who thought it was a good idea to get their face tattooed, right? Like that doesn't speak to somebody's decision-making capabilities, right? So you're dealing with people like that with even less like self-reflective ability than me, which is like a small amount. You talk shit about their fucking beatdown band, they want to crack your skull open. So I think I have a growing number of cities in which I am not welcome, which is a lot of fun if you ask me. So
when trying to book a tour,
I've
kind of gotten to the point where I just really don't give a shit if people like it. Sometimes I don't even like my own music. I'm like, there's days I listen to it, I'm like, I can't believe I fucking wrote this, and I put it out. Like, who let me put this shit out? And then other days
I feel that way about a couple things.
Yeah, and then sometimes I'm like, damn. This shit, I should be a fucking pop star, right? You know, singer-songwriter making millions of dollars in my fucking mansion. And but then there's just every day that's in between. And you're like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm content with where I am.
Yeah, I'm chilling.
Well, Gray, it was a fucking pleasure having you on, man. I had a great time.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what, before we close out, do you want to tell people where they can find you on social media, or kind of any last little plug for maybe the podcast or Can I Kick It?
Yeah, sure. Follow me on social media at your own risk. It's not that good of a time, honestly. I deleted my Twitter a while ago just because it was doing nothing but just making me enemies. So you can find me on Facebook, but most of you are probably not 50, so I don't imagine you have one or actively use it. You can find me on Instagram at GrayXGordon, but I pretty much just post like clothes and selfies and occasional music stuff on there. Can I Kick It Vintage on Instagram, and Depop if that's your thing. If you want to buy some old clothes, I got hella vintage fuego on there, as the kids say. Beyond that, if you want to listen to any of my 24 bands, I post about most of them on Instagram and stuff. There's a list in my bio of some of the bands I currently play in. The Terminal Crush stuff you can get at the Really Rad Records website. Just Google Really Rad Records. I think it's reallyradrex.com, but I don't know because I'm not good at this. You can find the Terminal Crush record on Spotify, Terminal Crush Columbus. Check it out. I'm very proud of it. I'm very stoked that it's finally out. Beyond that, I got nothing else to plug.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, man. It's been a good time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, homie.
Yep, that's a wrap.
Hey, thanks for watching Gear Over Beer. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. If you'd like to support this show, make sure to subscribe to our Patreon for additional content like the video version of this podcast.